is alive with potential here in Tsitsikamma, and the key to unlocking economic prosperity on the continent means access to reliable and affordable electricity. But with only 43% of the continent connected to electricity, finding ways to propel the continent towards energy independence means finding sustainable solutions.
We have to use the resources that we have in a very meaningful and reliable and sustainable way, because they will have to carry this continent forward.
We keep talking about increasing intra-Africa trade. Can that truly be done without electrifying the continent?
Unfortunately, no, it can't. You cannot trade, you cannot manufacture goods and services unless you've got the power to power your factories. Even in terms of supply chains, you're talking using the internet, you're using digital supply chains. You need the internet. That also needs electricity. So without electrification, we cannot do anything. The other thing that we also need to bear in mind in terms of power generation is that in terms of financing power projects, the key funders for power projects are looking at clean energy.
According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, Sub-Saharan Africa attracted 65% of the world's off-grid renewable energy investments between 2007 to 2019, with hydropower leading technology, followed by solar and wind power. So let's also talk about what opportunities there are for African businesses.
In addition to making sure that African companies are engaged in those projects, we need to make sure that young upcoming entrepreneurs are also brought in to the supply chain. So they could be component manufacturers.
We're talking big money here, right? That's the thing. These projects need deep pockets.
But the supply chain into those projects can bring in your SMMEs. So what happens is our big companies like Trans-Africa Projects, Actom, who are South African born and bred companies, we align them with smaller SMMEs. So when they go and look at projects, they'll take those small companies with them, because in 20, 30, 50 years, those SMMEs are your next multinational.
The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which went into effect in January this year, has the potential to significantly impact the energy sector by encouraging cross-border energy diversification, for example, as the agreement looks to create a continent-wide single market for goods and services. Do you think that that's going to change the playing field and how we deal with electrification?
There's already a push from African countries to make sure that we electrify the continent.
One such off-grid renewable energy system is located in Kenya's lush and leafy Murang'a County.
So we're basically using the force of the river, falling from a higher point to a lower point, harnessing that kinetic energy and transforming it into electric energy. And in Murang'a County, that's the area where we are in the greater Mount Kenya region. Actually, Murang'a County is so hilly that it has the potential to power about 55% of all of Kenya. At the moment, we are developing the first on-grid power plants that will be providing power to the national electricity grids, and that one will produce power for 15,000 people.
Examples are emerging of big industry also pivoting to renewable energy, like in the case of Oando Energy Resources, a major player in the oil and gas sector operating in Nigeria and Sao Tome and Principe. As one of the largest oil and gas companies on the continent, why is it time for you to pivot into renewable energy?
Globally, there is certainly that mind frame across pretty much every oil and gas company today. We see a lot of shifts happening, and Eleni, if you allow me, I'd speak to some of those. The first is the fact that the pandemic has taken away the notion of this heavy oil dependency. We see that a lot of the renewable assets were easier to manage through this period. And when I say easier, I'm talking from an attention to equipment perspective. It's only sustainable from a business standpoint to look to a future that's renewable. It certainly is what we're focusing on. We've pivoted to understand what that space requires, but most importantly, starting to drive the steps to create the investments in that space.
You've built 300 kilometers worth of gas pipelines supplying gas into Coca-Cola and Dangote and other industries as well. How important is it to think ahead in trying to help businesses move away from the reliance of fuel and diesel?
Gas is a key component of that transition. We see gas playing a huge role in the energy mix moving forward. We see gas as the catapult that would certainly move Africa into an industrialized phase. Renewables from a cost perspective present a bit of a challenge for the continent. All the same, it's not taking out of the equation. It's certainly something we would continue to look at and invest in, but we see gas being the immediate transition and the support structure.
What impact is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement going to have on the oil and gas industry, on renewables, and generally trading in power from country to country? Do you think that's a dream we could actually see?
We, as a country, export a significant amount of our crude to European countries and Asia, whilst the rest of Africa, in a sense, that requires this product, isn't able to trade as freely. And this is no fault of the government, or it's about the union. It's about creating this free trade, like we talked about, borderless countries, the movement of value across the borders to enhance the development of the continent.
So ANDA owns one of the turbines that helps the national grid get back online when there's a power outage. So how important is the private sector involvement in handling the back-end infrastructure to support the national grid?
It's exciting when you're able to develop your assets and supply gas in conjunction with the government to a plant of this nature. But what's more exciting is that we can take this model and duplicate it and create more of this around the country. Certainly, private sector has a huge role to play. The investment is required. The country is open for business. And I think it's important that as private sector players, we realize that the provision of electricity, whether it be capture power or grid power, is solely not the government's role.
The off-grid solar industry has an annual turnover of $1.75 billion, serving 420 million users within the energy sector, according to a 2020 World Bank report. In Africa, the market is growing rapidly with a fall in the cost of solar panel technologies and the rise in mobile banking and affordable financing in the continent's fast-growing economies. And Africa is home to the largest solar plant in the world. This is Morocco's Nour Solar Complex, situated in Ouarzazate, connecting millions of people and businesses to power.
Everybody agrees that renewable energy is the future, but in order to take the lead, the cost of energy needs to continually decrease. And actually, it's taking the right path, because now we are talking about cost of solar energy that is competitive with the conventional energy, and sometimes is cheaper than conventional energy.
Policies have changed in terms of the energy sector. They've allowed for the pricing of the electricity to be such that the project owners can get a good return. The cost of the energy has gone down remarkably. The renewable energy has gone down remarkably. So project owners can see a return. I think there's sufficient financing for good energy projects on the continent.
The giant installation covers the size of around 3,500 football pitches. At the heart of it is this 250-meter solar tower. 7,400 huge mirrors reflect sunlight to the top of the tower, where it heats up a liquid. As a result, steam is produced, which then turns the turbines to create energy. When Nour Solar Complex was built in 2016, the World Bank reported that imported fossil fuels provided 97% of Morocco's energy needs. Today, renewable energy generates around 35% of Morocco's electricity, with this solar plant connecting 2 million people and local businesses to this 24/7 power supply. In the future, Morocco wants to become an energy exporter within Africa and to Europe.
Rather than speaking about exporting, let's say the dream, or let's say the first step, is to interconnect African countries between them, meaning of the grid, the electrical grid. Once we have an interconnection between all countries, for example, like Europe, we can exchange easily electricity production between countries. And this is actually the first step to start exchanging electricity and exporting or importing between countries.
The Pan-African collaboration is well underway, with the Moroccan government recently launching a joint initiative with the Islamic Development Bank to help fund renewable energy projects on the continent.
Currently, we have already signed 14 MOUs with 14 African countries to develop solar energy and renewable energy in their countries, and to share our experience and lessons learned with them. Actually, we are receiving a lot of visits here from African countries to see, let's say, in real how it looks like, how it works, and to make them believe that such a big project is possible anywhere in Africa where they have the necessary solar resources.
The World Bank invested more than $11.5 billion into renewable energy projects in Africa between 2014 and 2018, as electrification is seen as key in driving economic growth on the continent. As a leader in renewable energy in Africa, South Africa is home to enormous solar plants, and this wind accounts for half of South Africa's access to renewable power. The wind energy market in Africa is, however, perceived as lagging behind other clean power technologies, but there are those working to blow this perception away.
When we think of renewable energy, most people think of solar when it comes to what the African continent is geared towards. Do you think that we have understated the potential of wind power?
Yes, definitely we have, because if you think of it, until maybe just about 10 years ago, there was no large-scale wind energy projects, at least in the SADC region, in the African continent. And even in the sub-Saharan Africa, we've got 34 wind farm projects spread across the country, mostly in the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape, and then also in the Western Cape at this point. So there's a lot of untapped potential, not just in South Africa, but in the whole continent. And the industry is looking forward to actually turning that into Power to Power Africa.
Africa is a continent of opportunity, especially in terms of the growth of renewable energy projects like wind farms. Many of Africa's biggest economies are actively opening renewable energy investment opportunities in their countries, including the likes of Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa.
There has been, the big question of what's cheaper, what's easier to plug into the grid, what is more reliable.
Wind was the cheapest and solar was very expensive, but it has come down so drastically. So I think at this stage, both technologies are now comparable, and when we're deploying renewables, we also need to think about not just putting electrons into the grid, but we need to think about what sort of economic development opportunities we can derive from this. We need to then strike the balance between creating a South African industrial base on the back of renewable energy development, but at the same time keep the prices as low as possible.
More than 90% of electricity generated comes from thermal power stations, with less than 10% coming from renewables. This mix makes South Africa one of the top carbon-emitting nations globally. Solar and wind are expected to, however, be responsible for 25% of electricity generation by 2030, and they are expected to create jobs.
The most exciting thing is the wind turbine technicians that we are training in the country are actually now finding jobs throughout the world because we have created that capacity. We are now able to export it to other countries.
You know that upskilling people is so vital, specifically in the space that you're in. What about the renewable energy sector? We're relying on importation of hardware. How do we localize?
whatever we choose to do has to be sustainable as a continent. And moving into that renewable energy space, we must ensure that whatever technologies we choose to go with, we can bring those supply chains into the country, develop the skills, ensure that the feedstock is here, localized, ensure that the manufacturing and production is localized, and ensure that the distribution channels and consumption is possible. In the event we can't, it's clear the reliance for source or feedstock will have to come from other countries. And from an energy independence standpoint, we want to focus on the sources that can be localized. We can create jobs just like we have with gas and oil, able to resource ourselves from our backyards and provide the much needed power. The gig economy relies on one thing: power. I don't think we'll be talking about computers, communication, Internet of Things, big data without power. So if Africa is going to play a significant role in that new economy, then we must gear ourselves up to at least have the foundation to do so.
Today, an inspection team at an Eastern Cape wind farm are using drones to examine turbine blades. It is skills like these that are now being exported across the continent and around the world.
The wind industry in South Africa has managed to skill local technicians to an extent that other industries have not managed to do so. We see wind farms being built in Europe during the last couple of years, where South African companies have taken a lead role. And we start to become an industry that can export the knowledge. We do that to the benefit of the balance of the continent of Africa, so obviously, and we see wind farm development coming up in Kenya and in many other countries.
In South Africa, the program that allows independent power producers to submit competitive bids to design, develop and operate large or small-scale renewable energy power plants has been an enormous success.
We are headed for a huge growth phase in the industry. There's going to be lots of opportunities for players across the value chain, whether development, whether construction, operation and maintenance, to actually get involved in the sector and contribute and benefit.
Since its launch in 2011, the Public-Private Partnership Program has attracted over $13 billion in private sector investment and has created around 38,000 jobs, predominantly in local communities.
The level of community involvement is very important for every renewable energy power plant. One of the best examples is the Tsitsikamma wind farm in the Eastern Cape, where the community is not just the landowner, but as well a shareholder in the operating company.
The Eastern Cape province in South Africa has the largest number of wind projects in the country. Access to reliable power remains key for the continent's economic development, with 41% of African firms identifying unreliable electricity as a major constraint to business in 2019. This Tsitsikamma community wind farm powers local industries by supplying the national grid with clean energy.
We call ourselves wind farmers, and we do exactly that. You know, we harness the wind, we turn the moving particles into mechanical energy and then into electrical energy, and then eventually we sell that.
So what makes the Tsitsikamma region special and adequate to set up a wind farm?
We see average wind speeds of around 7 meters per second, which is fairly good. The geography of the area was good enough for the turbine foundations, and something else which obviously is very important was the transmission and the grid.
Eskom, the South African national electricity provider, was established almost a century ago and is Africa's largest power utility. Today, it receives help from the likes of these turbines feeding into the national grid.
So how many houses can you light up from this farm?
This is probably about 100,000 houses. So we generate around 320 gigawatt hours of electricity per year.
While all of South Africa's wind farms are located in 3 of the 9 provinces, there are potential wind farm sites across the country and the continent, which could connect remote communities to valuable power and economic opportunities.
In South Africa, the western coast and the eastern coasts of South Africa, and then some of the inland escarpment areas have fantastic wind. So making sure that the transmission infrastructure is strong enough is important, but it certainly is something which is taking off at a massive rate.
How expensive is it to set up a wind farm? These turbines are enormous.
It's probably around $4 to $5 million per turbine.
Do you think we're going to see a lot more of these projects in the next few years? And how much do you think that it can, actually contribute to the national grid?
The government's brought out the Integrated Resource Plan 2019, which gives us an idea of the renewable, the energy mix up to 2030. We are looking at around 500 average-sized turbines that needs to be commissioned every year to reach that target. We're really in for a fantastic ride.
Just how important is it to get community buy-in when you set up a project like this?
It's critically important. We lease the property from the farmers, but the farmers still have full use of the facility. Creating enterprise development opportunities and employing local labour during both the construction and in the operations phase is very, very important. We have to give back. You cannot do this alone. You have to take the community along. They are part of this business. They are shareholders in the company. They are beneficiaries of the community work that we do. We have a responsibility to make sure that we supply electricity in a sustainable way, but we look after the communities and the environment.
And as Africa's renewable energy projects take off, a more diversified energy portfolio in Africa has the potential to power up the continent.
When we talk about electrification, I think we have a model that would work for the continent, which is captive power. Captive power takes you into the local areas that require the power. You move away from the large-scale grid investments that are crippling for our poorly funded governments, but you're able to create power for, the microcosms that make up effectively the sum of the parts. That's how you go about this. And I think in Africa, we figure this out. So when we talk about Pan-African trade, for me to get power to you, I have to create infrastructure.
From me, Eleni Jokos, here in Tsitsikamma, South Africa, I'll see you next time.